Some of you may know that our speaker today is Kyle Patterson. She's been with Rocky Mountain National Park, I think in various different roles, but right now she is the public affairs officer. So she speaks for Rocky Mountain National Park a lot, has a podcast I would encourage you to see. And I'm wearing my hat because Rocky Mountain National Park is so close to our hearts. We got married just at a dude ranch just outside Rocky Mountain National Park. I have some of the best pictures of my family. They look like movie stars. I'm not kidding. Inside Rocky Mountain National Park. And it's one of the most wonderful places on earth, and it's right here in our backyard. So I hope that we will have lots of questions, and I know that we are really excited to hear you speak. Kyle, come on up, and we're going to do it. Let's welcome her. All right.
Thanks so much, Cassidy. It's a pleasure to join you all, and I so appreciate the invite. And when David first reached out to me, he said, we'd really like to learn more about visitor use management at Rocky Mountain National Park. So that's really what the focus of my presentation and comments are going to be today, and then also realize that you might have other questions about Rocky Mountain National Park, so we'll leave some time at the end to hopefully address some of the questions that you have. I know that many people have come up to me and just referenced their love affair with Rocky Mountain National Park and what an incredible resource it is. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that too, and some of the wonderful opportunities and challenges that a place like Rocky Mountain National Park addresses for managers. As Cassie mentioned, I have been at Rocky Mountain National Park for 21 years, and so I thought I just started last Friday, but apparently the time has gone faster than I thought. And I've been the public affairs officer for that amount of time as well, and I sit on the leadership team for the park as well. So I'm very much immersed in visitor use management, so we'll talk mainly, like I mentioned, about that today, interspersed with some pretty pictures as well. So if you haven't been, how many of you have been to Rocky Mountain National Park in the last 10 years? Oh, see. Wonderful. Last 3 years. Very good. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So this might be what you experienced in 2019. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what we've seen over the last couple of years. So you all can probably see this and read this along with me, but Rocky Mountain National Park is one of the busiest national parks in the country. In 2019, we had our record level of visitation at 4.6 million visitors, and then we'll show you what that looks like on a graph as we've continued to see our visitation increase and plateau and increase and plateau. And no wonder Rocky Mountain National Park is an unbelievable place. It's one of the oldest national parks in the country, was created in 1915. The reasons that people come now are the same as they've done over the decades. Scenic grandeur, you guys could repeat this, and this is probably the reason why you all have gone. Scenic grandeur, watchable wildlife, and amazing recreational opportunities. Depending upon what time of year you come, unbelievable opportunities and great access, as you all know. So in 2022, Rocky was the 4th most visited national park, and that was with timed entry in place at 4.3 million. So we have seen this dramatic increase in our visitation. From 2012 to 2019, a 44% increase in visitation in a relatively short period of time. And so what we needed to do to address this as managers is really acknowledge and accept basically what we call 4 tenets that we needed to manage for and really consider and look at. And those were visitor and staff safety. What was that level of increase in a short period of time? How is it addressing visitor and staff safety, the overall visitor experience, resource protection, which is why we exist, and then operational capacity. What can our existing operational capacity take with this increased level of visitation? It's a good problem to have in many ways, and that people that are coming to visit Rocky Mountain National Park, that are moving to Colorado, are very passionate about public lands, and they want to enjoy them and they want to recreate. And so this is an opportunity for us to continue to connect with visitors, and also people want to be stewards of these places too. So how can we all work together to make sure that they're around for generations to come with this level of increase in visitation? So these are all things that we're coming together to address. So in 2016 through 2019, in 2015 we basically saw what we call a breaking point, or a tipping point, where we saw a 20% increase in visitation in 1 year. And that congestion and crowding led to a lot of issues. One of them being visitor-to-visitor conflict, visitor-to-staff conflict. Parking spaces were not available. People were at entrance lines, like you saw that photo. They were stuck in traffic in Lyons, then they were stuck in traffic in Estes, then they got to the entrance stations in the park and oftentimes took that out on fellow visitors or our staff. And so in 2016, we started experimenting with visitor use management in our most highly congested areas. So many people here in the room love the park, and you could recite these to me as well. Most highly congested areas in Rocky Mountain National Park: Bear Lake Road Corridor, Wild Basin, and Alpine Visitor Center along Trail Ridge Road. So those were the areas we really focused our efforts on, and basically when it reached that crescendo, we would turn people around and say, you know, we don't know when you can come back, we don't know when there's going to be capacity, you can keep circling the area, but we're not going to let you keep going up Bear Lake Road to circle the area. And so those are things that we started, these what we call kind of stopgap measures. Stick your finger in the dike and continue to try to manage that way, which is certainly not ideal. Again, this shows our visitation. I know this is probably very difficult to see this graph, but it starts in 1915 when the park was created through 2022. You'll see that through the history of Rocky Mountain National Park, there's been an increase and a plateau, and an increase and a plateau, and an increase and a plateau. And so, you know, no surprise, but look at that dramatic increase starting in 2012. And that's mainly tied to the population growth in Colorado. So about 30 to 40% of our visitors come from Colorado, and then you can, it spreads out from there. We do have international visitors, not a high amount of international visitors, but people representing a number of countries that come to the park. And so really, this is what visitor use management is all about, is the Park Service mission. The National Park Service mission we take very seriously, and we base a lot of our management decisions on this delicate balancing act between providing recreational opportunities for all of us now and leaving unimpaired operations and experiences for future generations. And as we continue to move forward with this presentation, please keep in mind that unimpaired for future generations part of it. Because when you see that level of visitation increase and you see the impacts, you know we are not doing a good job on that part of our mission. And that's something that we've been tackling. For those of you that haven't been in the park in a while, or maybe just the last couple of years, we want to share these photos as well, because this is what a lot of our visitors were experiencing. In one photo, you see people waiting for the shuttle bus at Bear Lake Road. That photo on the bottom is our crowding at Alpine Visitor Center. So picture trying to turn into Alpine Visitor Center and then being in that snake of cars up to Gore Range Overlook. And then unfortunately, the experience of the photo there is you get a 2-for-1 in that photo. You see the traffic along the road, but you also see visitor behavior where somebody is basically less than a foot in front of an elk. Here are just some other crowding and congestion photos. We've got people waiting for the Bear Lake Road corridor, and then we have the basic, this is mainly during the elk rut. You can see the elk trying to cross the road and get through that level of traffic. And then also keep in mind that we might have a cardiac event at a trailhead that's up that road that our rangers are trying to respond to and having a really difficult time getting through that congestion. So these are all things as managers that we're trying to wrap our brain around, is how we can continue to do that mission of the Park Service and that balancing act. Day use is not a new thing at Rocky Mountain National Park or the National Park Service in general. So this just gives you a quick breakdown of some of the things that we've done in the past. In the 1970s, a shuttle bus system was put in place. In the Bear Lake Road corridor, it was mainly school buses, very different than what it looks like now. In 2000, we incorporated a more modern shuttle bus system in the Bear Lake Road corridor. Have any of you participated in the shuttle bus system along the Bear Lake Road corridor? You've experienced that. And so it opens up this whole great loop hiking opportunity and all of these great recreational opportunities as well. Overnight use has been addressed in the past as well with wilderness camping permits and front country camping permits. So really our focus continues to be this increase in day use that we've seen over the last 10 plus years. So I mentioned from 2016 to 2019, we're sticking our finger in the dike for this level of visitation that's increasing in the impacts that we're seeing to resources and visitor and staff safety and visitor experience and operational capacity. What can our trails take? What can our vault toilets take? What can the wildlife take? So we tried this. Okay, maybe this will fix it. Maybe better communications will fix it. Our visitation continued to climb. 2020 happened. Crushed many of our worlds, and it gave us an opportunity to step back and look at visitor use management in the national park. So many of you may be aware that Estes Park is one of the oldest populations in the state of Colorado, and so here's COVID coming. Here's this level of visitation coming. Other mountain communities like Breckenridge and Silverthorne and Steamboat Springs and Crested Buttes and Aspen are all like, okay, we can't have this level of visitation as COVID is coming. And so we started seeing this increase of people saying we're going to come to Rocky Mountain National Park and Estes Park and Grand Lake in March of 2020, spring break, because we can't get to these other mountain communities or these ski areas are closing, et cetera, et cetera. So our communities were very, very concerned based on the size and public health and what our communities could take. Rocky Mountain National Park was closed for 2 months during that time period, as were many other national parks, and we all know many other locations across the country. So we put timed entry permits in place with recreation.gov in 5 weeks to reopen Rocky Mountain National Park because we knew so many people needed it more than ever in 2020. So we started implementing a park-wide timed entry permit system in 2020, mainly focused on basically a 60% capacity of our parking. So that's what we looked at. How many parking spots do we have in Rocky? We're going to do a 60% number, knowing that we're going to have people coming in and after the required timed entry permit system. So in the end of 2020, it was roughly 73%. Another thing that hit all of us in 2020 were historic wildfires, which you also know impacted Rocky greatly. We had the Cameron Peak fire in the northern part of the park, East Troublesome fire that started outside the west side of the park and moved through. In 2020, the park and our, surrounding area certainly had a lot facing us. And so we implemented this 2020 timed entry permit system park-wide. Then we adjusted it a little in 2021 because we knew the increase in visitation was occurring because more and more people wanted to go outside. And so other public lands were seeing 100 to 200% increases in their visitation in 2021. So that's why we continued it in 2021, but we changed it a little. We adapted. We said we don't really need a park-wide one from 6 a.m. to 5 p.m. as we did in 2020. We can look at different parts of the park differently. So we broke them out and had a Bear Lake Road corridor, timed entry, and then we had a rest of park. And then in 2022, we continued adjustments and adapted accordingly. These are the things and how our pilots have been evaluated. We've had extensive traffic and trail counters. We've done visitor perception studies. We've done mid and after action reviews, looked at visitor comments, and did baseline data collection as we continue to see a proliferation of social trails and human waste in the wilderness and the backcountry. This might be difficult to see, but I wanted to share the next 2 slides because we did a survey for those that participated in the timed entry permit system through recreation.gov. And out of 10,000 surveys returned, and again, we want to acknowledge that these were people that used the reservation system. These were not people that were unable to use the reservation system or were not aware of it or didn't plan ahead. But 77% of people said that their experience was the same or better under timed entry permit system. Wanted to show you this next slide as well, and again, my apologies, I know this is difficult to read as well, but this provides a breakdown of asking visitors, do you support a visitor use management system spreading people out throughout the day and throughout the park if we are addressing certain things, like emergency access, like resource protection, and people supported that. They said, yes, we do. We support some kind of visitor use management if it is needed to address these other issues. I'm going to go through these slides very quickly because I know that there's a lot of people that love to see, data that supports this. So what our timed entry permit system does is spread visitors out throughout the day and throughout the park, and that is what our purpose is. So prior to our TEP system, most of our visitors would come in between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. So you'd have this mass push, mass pressure on the park, impacting visitor experiences from that time frame. So this slide basically shows you what our visitation has looked like the last couple of years, pre-timed entry, so pre-2020, and then after 2020. And you can see from this that it spreads people out throughout the park and throughout the day. Okay, this is specific to the Beaver Meadows entrance. And this, again, reason why you have this is it just shows the consistency that we can operate now through June through September. We know now when people are going to come in, and we can address that as far as cleaning bathroom facilities, so many different things we can now staff for this rather than these pulses. And then what happened after we ended TEPS? The day after we ended TEPS, and for the next 2 weeks, we all went back to our old behaviors and went right back from 10 to 2. Even though we were like, spread it out throughout the day, come early, come late. Everybody was like, well, it works better for me to come in between 10 and 2. And so, again, it shows that pre-TEPS, it spreads people out throughout the day and throughout the park. After the timed entry permit system, we all are human beings and we go back to our behavior. So here are some lessons from last year's timed entry visitor use management as we embark in 2023. More and more people are aware of the timed entry permit system. We see the acceptance increasing. We also understand that this impacts people's spontaneous visits to the park as well, which is tough. It's tough to not be able to just jump in the car and go in, but you probably weren't able to do that for the last 10 to 15 years either, in the Bear Lake Road corridor in particular, but we absolutely acknowledge that that does impact that. We continue to see this observed change in visitation as we get back to some kind of normal after 2020. So we're adapting for that as well, and you can see some of the things that we saw last year pertaining to that. Some days were not sold out, so there was availability for people last minute to make those decisions. And I'm not going into the specific details of the timed entry permit system, but I'm happy to do that as well. We're going to be doing another pilot this year, and it's basically timed entry reservations are required in the Bear Lake Road corridor from 5 a.m. to 6 p.m. And for the rest of the park, 9 a.m. to 2 p.m., which is the majority of the park. So many of our folks and visitors can get in before 9 or after 2 without a timed entry permit system. There's several national parks that are piloting this as well. If you're someone who travels to a lot of national parks or have family and friends who do, Arches and Glacier is doing this as well. Acadia National Park in Maine, and then several Colorado National Forests. Mount Evans, Brainerd Lake, Pikes Peak is doing this as well, timed entry permit systems. Here are some of the changes that I just mentioned. Because we had such a glorious fall last year, we saw, again, that spike that you saw in that graph, so we're extending this. By extending this, I think we have guaranteed that we'll have a cold and wet and moist October, and we won't need it. But we'll all be happy about that for snowpack. But we've put that in place for that reason. It was amazing how many concerns and complaints we got after October 7th last year, where people were like, why are you not extending this? I just had a horrible, crowded experience in the park. And then we've revised some of our reentry policies. As we've been doing this stopgap measure, reactionary, we've also been doing a parallel long-range visitor use management planning. And so we've gone through 2 what we call, and I know this is very bureaucratic speak, pre-NEPA civic engagement aspects. That's the National Environmental Policy Act, where we're really going out to the public and saying, you know, what do you want when you come to a national park like Rocky Mountain National Park? What are some of your solutions? How do you want us to help steward and protect this place? And so that's what we have been doing, and I know we do not have time today, so I'm not going to do this, but I hope that if this is something you want to dive deeper in, that you go to our website, and from the home page, you can go to long-range visitor use management planning. From there, we have a storyboard that highlights some of the things that we are trying to address with our long-range visitor use planning. Later this summer, we'll be coming out to the public with draft alternatives for people to respond and react to. And so if this is something that you want to be more involved with or more engaged with, I wanted to share with you this link, but also be mindful of the time today and not wanting to take too much of your time to highlight this. All of the strategies we're looking at have to address these 3 areas. So what's feasible, what's effective, and what's desirable. We can't build our way out of this situation either, and so we have to be thinking through this as well. How can we leave the park unimpaired for future generations? This is our timeline for our long-range visitor use management planning efforts. And so we hope to have a final plan by the winter of this coming year, so that we don't have to continue to do these pilot operations and the public can continue to acknowledge and be part of the solution. I also want to just wrap up to share that part of this too is encouraging people to recreate responsibly. And one of the things that we get asked frequently is, are people behaving worse than they used to in public lands? It's hard, you know, it depends on where you are and what you're seeing. Personally, I don't think people are behaving worse. I think most visitors that come to national parks are doing the right thing. They want to be part of the solution. They want to protect this place that they are so connected to and that maybe they have this long generational connection to. But as we see an increase in visitation, probably the same percentage of the population, let's just say 4%, that don't know how to behave when they go to public lands or national parks. And so 4% of 4.5 million people versus 4% of 3.5 million people is probably just more visible to us. And of those that aren't behaving correctly, there's a large percentage of those that just don't know better. That, like, you know, help me know how to protect this fragile tundra. Help me understand about approaching wildlife. Help me realize that I should use a zoom camera rather than my iPhone, getting closer and closer to the elk. And so how do we address that? The ones that don't care, there's probably not a lot we can do except for our law enforcement to address that. But the ones that don't know and want to know better, you know, certainly these are all communication tools that not only the National Park Service is doing, but county open space is doing, you know, the city of Boulder parks are doing. We all partner with some of this recreate responsibly, and you know, how can we help people pledge to protect these amazing areas? Now, I realize that many of you may have come and been like, I didn't know we were going to talk about visitor use management. But hopefully y'all did. But there might be other things that you want to talk or question about Rocky and say, okay, that's a lot. That's management. You know, either go forth and do good, or I'm not crazy about that visitor use management timed entry permit system. But you might also just have general questions about the park. So I think we have a few minutes. Cassidy and Carl, I look to you to see. Yep. Okay. Some up here?
You got to put your hand up, Meryl. Thanks a lot, Vanessa. You know, I echo Cassidy's words, how special the park is to us and how much we care for it. And Leslie and I have loved it since we moved to Colorado, yeah. So thank you for that valuable resource. My question concerns the effects of climate change on the park, and specifically, as you mentioned, the increase in wildfires, which are getting more intense and more numerous, and bark beetle infestation. What is the park doing to address those two almost unaddressable challenges?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for that question. And as you said, some of it is addressable and some of it is unaddressable. So I'm happy to quickly reference both and then happy to talk with you afterwards at more length. So you mentioned the beetle outbreak and epidemic. So that is native beetle, but obviously hitting epidemic proportions because of climate. Milder winters, drought-stricken trees, not as, more species coming in, and so prior to all of this, you'd have these really cold winters that would knock that population down, and we're not seeing that. So beetle and outbreaks impact the forest differently depending upon what stage the outbreak is in. So as you can imagine, the west side started in the early 2000s, for those of you that have been in this area for a long time, marched its way east. And so now we're being impacted by the spruce beetle. So it wasn't enough that we dealt with all the different mountain pine native beetles. Now we're dealing with spruce beetle and the killing of those trees. One of the things that we really have to take into consideration is the fire behavior in these forests now based on the beetle outbreak. And so it varies depending upon, you can imagine, like think through a firefighter with me. Where are the fuels? Are the fuels down low? Like the trees have now toppled over in many of these places, or the fuels up high. And so crown fires will happen if the fuels are still up high. So certainly that's something that firefighters have to be thinking through when it comes to those areas and climate impacts. We're seeing less snowpack, and so that's a concern to us. We're also seeing species that are very indicator species that really rely on certain temperatures and snowpack. Species like pika, right at our alpine tundra, and ptarmigan. They rely very much on that. We've done a lot of research in the park on ptarmigans and pika, and so pika certainly are hanging in there right now, but a lot of the modeling and predictions are that will not be the case 50 years from now because they need that snowpack and they need the temperatures. They rely on that because they don't hibernate. They're not like marmots, they don't hibernate. So what we can do as park managers is work on the resiliency of these species. So how can we help keep our wetlands and riparian areas more healthy? How can we manage those areas? How can we manage trails and social trails tied to visitor use management so that we're not putting additional stressors on species like ptarmigan and pika? Those are some of the proactive steps we can take. And a lot, too, is being advocates. We have a nitrogen reduction plan with the state of Colorado and the EPA. We're the only national park that has a specific plan for Rocky Mountain National Park, and a lot of it is tied to additional stressors of nitrogen deposition on our tundra that adds another stressor tied to climate. So it's being an advocate, research canary in a coal mine, to make sure that the public also is aware of some of these issues. What are things we have in our power to address, and what are some of the things that are outside influences that we can't do a lot about, but we sure can highlight the research that's taking place in the park that indicates that climate is absolutely impacting Rocky Mountain National Park. Does that? Thanks very much. Okay, I know we got only a certain amount of time. We could talk about this for a long time. Thank you for your interest.
Okay, switching topics just a little bit. Dogs, now, I know they haven't been indigenous species there for quite a while, but for owners that actually, pick up afterwards and keep them on a leash, is there any chance at all or not?
Thank you for being a responsible dog owner. We appreciate that. Let me just say that. Rocky Mountain National Park certainly does not consider dogs to be native wildlife in Rocky Mountain National Park. I also am a mom of a 2-legged child and a 4-legged child, so I understand the connection to fur babies. We certainly want there to be a public lands area where visitors can recreate, where they're not encountering people with dogs. Wildlife reacts differently when dogs are in the area. Even if you are the most responsible owner, wildlife will react differently, even if dogs are on leashes. Dogs introduce diseases that other wildlife can pick up. And then also, wildlife have killed dogs in Rocky Mountain National Park. So owls, mountain lions, coyotes. And so we certainly want to keep wildlife safe from dogs and dogs safe from wildlife. But thank you. I know, it's hard.
We have a question from Zoom. Lynn Siegel wants to know how the governor, how Jared Polis's land use liberalization project, which will draw much more population in Colorado, will affect the park. Where/when is the carrying capacity restriction that would preclude folks from even wanting to move here or even visit?
Okay. So, certainly Rocky Mountain National Park is a national park that's under exclusive federal jurisdiction. And so, but certainly all the actions and decisions and steps that are taken throughout the state of Colorado certainly impact Rocky Mountain National Park. And so the group that you might not have noticed on the one slide is NOCO 2050. It's public lands groups in northern Colorado. Boulder County Open Space is very involved with this, as well as Boulder County. And so it's certainly something that all of our public lands have been dealing with and addressing over the last 10 years is the overall increase in population. So that's not going to change. The population is going to continue to grow. We don't see that graph that I showed you taking a steep decline no matter really what happens outside of the park. So it's an important reason for us to continue to move forward with long-range planning. We are considering what the capacity looks like in Rocky Mountain National Park, and it varies greatly in the park, as you can imagine, based on what infrastructure we have in certain areas. So the Bear Lake Road corridor might have more of an infrastructure in place to take higher visitation, whereas other places may not.
Hi, we have a place over by Grand Lake, and obviously the amount of traffic coming in from the west side is less than the east side. Do you have any statistics that you could share with us that would explain how much more the impact is from the east side than from the west side?
Yep, absolutely. So 85% of our overall visitation comes in through the east side of Rocky Mountain National Park. So 15% comes in through the west side. And you think about the population, mainly in Colorado, it's more accessible from the east side, places like Denver International Airport. We continue to see, though, people using Trail Ridge Road as a way to avoid Interstate 70 as well. And so we're continuing to see this trend happening, particularly on Sunday afternoons. Maybe you've seen that as well, where people are heading eastbound, heading back to Wyoming or northern Colorado or other places. So we're certainly seeing some trends change, but it's usually the 15% to 85% breakdown. So pre-2016, we continue to try to encourage people, come in through different entrances, spread out that way. But a lot of times I think it's just the logistics of where people live. But that's the breakdown for you. Thank you.
Great. We have time for one last question.
Okay, thank you so much for your service and this wonderful presentation. On a slightly different topic, but related to reducing our impacts, My understanding is that the National Park Service is considering a policy around limiting single-use disposable plastics in national parks nationwide, and I'm wondering your thoughts on that and whether that will make a difference in terms of management.
Yeah. So we are excited about this initiative. We really are. And it's something that we are continuing to work really closely, particularly on our concessioners, to move forward with that. So the National Park Service has certain contracts with concessioners, depending upon what national park. We have a partnership right now and a contract with Xanterra at Alpine Visitor Center and Trail Ridge Store, if you're familiar with Trail Ridge Store next to that. So we continue to work with them and have for years prior to this initiative. So a lot of it is partnering with our concessioners to do that. Also making sure that we have an infrastructure in place that also encourages reusable items. So water filling stations at our visitor center. Working with the Rocky Mountain Conservancy, our nonprofit partner, to sell refillable water bottles at the nature stores rather than plastic bottles. So continuing to work with our contractors that might be on construction projects as well as our own staff on addressing these issues as well. I think it's going to take us a little time to get there, but we're already moving full speed ahead for that. You know, we've been really fortunate to continuing to try to educate and communicate with the public about recycling when they're in the park, but if we could get to the point where it doesn't come in at all, even better. And it would certainly help our operational capacity, to come full circle with your question, when it comes to our staff having to focus on recyclable, bins. We're happy to do it, but if we continue to have it not come in to begin with, that's even going to be an added plus. And thank you all for what you do as well. I use your services just up the street.
Kyle, we get the last word. And thank you so much for your excellent presentation today and for taking the time to come all the way down here to present to us. You know, we hope it wasn't a bad thing to ask you when you have 4 million people waiting for you back up there at the park. This wasn't mentioned earlier, but Kyle is, in addition to everything else, a good Rotarian. And as a Rotarian, you know this. You know that Rotary has been involved in the effort to eradicate polio around the world for the last 35 years. And while we've made great strides, we haven't quite gotten there, and our work is not yet finished. So as a token of our thanks, in your honor, the Boulder Rotary Club is going to contribute 100 doses of vaccine to the Polio Plus Fund. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all. Carol and I were just talking about, she says, how often do you get a chance to speak to groups? And I said, the last 3 years have been so odd that I really haven't had a lot of opportunities. So I am thrilled that you invited me to join you all. I get a lot of energy from faces rather than just, not having that for a number of years. And so I just really appreciate this opportunity. One of the things that we talk about in Rotary is it beneficial to all concerned. And so as we continue to move forward on visitor use management, we just continue to appreciate the support and the input and feedback we're getting from people, whether they support what we're doing or not, to continue to try to figure these things out together. So really appreciate your time and interest. Thank you very much.
Gordon McAnally is Rotary International President for the upcoming 2023-2024 Rotary year. On Wednesday, May 3rd at 12 noon, Colorado time, he will talk live from Scotland via Zoom about his new Rotary theme, Create Hope in the World. He will also talk with Ina Pinkney, a polio survivor and Chicago breakfast queen chef. The Zoom is free, but you do need to register in advance at the website or QR code on the screen. There's an opportunity to donate money to the Polio Plus in support of the Gates Foundation 2-to-1 match, but that is completely voluntary. May 3rd, 12 noon on Zoom, but you must pre-register to receive the Zoom link. Who let the dogs out? Boulder Rotary let them out last Sunday at the Valmont Dog Park. If you and your little furry friends were not there, then you missed out. Stay tuned for more opportunities for fun with Rotarians and their dogs as the summer unfolds. The Rotarians for Mental Health and Wellness Symposium is Friday, April 28th from 8:30 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. It is at the Marriott Denver Tech Center right before the State of the State luncheon. You do not need to RSVP for the symposium, so consider joining. For more information, contact Hans Wick or any member of the Behavioral Wellness Committee. All of May is Bring a Friend to Lunch Month. If you know someone you'd like to share the joy of Rotary with, then now is the time to bring them to lunch. We have 3 Friday meetings in May 5th, 12th, and 19th, and now is an excellent time to share with them the friendship, service, and impact that Boulder Rotary has in our community. If you bring a prospective new member, their first lunch is free, compliments of the club. So there is no reason to wait. Bring a Friend to Lunch Month is this May.
Next week, Boulder Rotary is honored to hear from Boulder Police Chief Maris Harold. She's been the chief of the Boulder Police Department since April of 2020. Chief Harold has had an interesting career track to become the chief, beginning her career as a social worker and moving to police work to get to the root of problems she saw in her community. Ultimately, she served the Cincinnati Police Department for 25 years before coming to Boulder. She's a problem solver and has been honored by institutions like George Mason University. They inducted her into the Evidence-Based Policing Hall of Fame in June of 2022. A Cincinnati police colleague said that Harold took command in Boulder during a pandemic, faced student unrest immediately over that summer, and in 2021, she lost an officer during the King Sooper shooting. It's been a very busy 3 years, and Chief Harold will talk to us about the challenges of policing. It's going to be another fascinating program. I hope to see you all there.
I won't deceive you, Mr. Stryker. We're running out of time.
Surely there must be something you can do.
I'm doing everything I can. And stop calling me Shirley.
All together now.
Have a great weekend.